Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I am, of course, your host, Daniel Rhodes. My guest today is Sara Ayers Rigsby. Sara, thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with everyone today.
Awesome. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Sara Ayers Rigsby, and I'm the regional director for Southeast and Southwest Florida here at the Florida Public Archaeology Network. So for those of you who may not be super familiar with Florida geography, that means I get to cover really exciting and beautiful places like the Florida Keys, the city of Miami, and the interior part of Florida that is south of Lake Okeechobee. As well as cities like Fort Myers and Charlotte Harbor, which are about an hour south of Tampa.
Spring break destinations all around.
Yeah.
So, Sara, what are we talking about today?
Sure. So today, I think we would like to talk about some of the archaeological work that's happening here in South Florida that's been in the news recently with recent development here in the city of Miami.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't keeping up with the story, some excavations are being done in downtown Miami. I assume downtown is the correct term.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
yeah, excavations are being done, but it's also clashing with real estate developments, and it's causing tension not only with the community, but people who actually are invested in archaeological preservation in general.
Yes, I think that's a great background for what's happening down there.
So, how did this situation, I'm going to call it a situation, start?
Sure, thanks so much. So for me, the situation started, I was out at a very famous archaeological site in Miami called the Miami Circle. It is a ceremonial site for the Tequesta, who were the group, the indigenous group that was living in South Florida at the time of Spanish colonial contact. So my colleague and I were out at the Miami Circle assisting the State Division of Historical Resources with monitoring some, I think they were trying to make some improvements to the site, like putting in some grass and things like that. So we walked a couple blocks to go get lunch, and we noticed that there was this massive construction site just maybe less than a block down from where we were working. And we were thinking, oh, what are they building there? I was really sad because the site had been my favorite parking lot. And then we noticed that the people behind the construction fence were actually archaeologists that we knew. So that was about maybe about a year and a half ago over the summer, or I guess 2 years ago now, when we noticed that there was this massive project going on. And basically, this site is along the Miami River. So this would have been the capital for the Tequesta. And what is happening at the site is that there is construction associated with private condo development. So the area had been a parking lot, and it's now being redeveloped into a multi-story condo building.
And that, of course, leads us to the problem. Most people, I'm going to assume all people would probably frown on this, is people putting condo developments on sites of indigenous occupation.
Sure. So it's, I always like to say that when we think about Florida archaeology, Florida's been a great place to live for 14,450 years. And sometimes all the things that make an area desirable now are things that people would have enjoyed in the past as well. So along the Miami River, we have this area that's extraordinarily desirable from a luxury real estate point of view, because, they're obviously we're talking, when I say condos, I'm not talking about, something like you or I might be interested in purchasing. I mean, maybe, I think the starting price, I want to say, is like maybe like $8 million for one of these condos.
Yeah, a little
So,
bit out of my price range.
yeah. So yeah, but the area is still incredibly desirable, right? So that creates this conflict and this tension where you have archaeological deposits of people occupying the area for thousands of years, and the City of Miami, who so this project is located on city, land that's within the city's jurisdiction. So how does the city navigate and balance those needs, right, for modern development and this historic and archaeological use of the site?
Yeah, and that brings us to the real reason I wanted to talk about this show is this happens a lot that cities, aren't always as considerate as they should be, especially of historical and cultural resources when it comes to expansion and development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that people might not be aware of is that there may not necessarily be a blanket protection for archaeological sites in the city or town where you're living. So this archaeological site is located within the city of Miami. So both the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County have ordinances which protect archaeological resources, right? So this site, which is located adjacent to the river, was considered to be a sensitive location for archaeology. So the city required the developer to have an initial investigation of the site, what we would refer to as like a phase 1 survey, where you likely do additional like shovel testing, try and define the boundaries of the site, try and see what you maybe could be dealing with, historical research, and that type of thing. So the site, so the archaeological consultant went out and performed that survey, and it indicated that they had found this site that could be really significant. But it's important to remember that this survey is only happening because there is that ordinance at the city level, and the city also has staff that are experts in archaeological analysis, right? They have an archaeologist on staff. Unfortunately, that's not the case for every city and municipality throughout the US. So in the absence of strong local guidelines, it's really hard to know what could be being developed in other areas.
So without this ordinance, people wouldn't even know that this is going on, would they?
Yeah, potentially. So it's great that the city has the ordinance to have that those initial sites flagged. Interestingly, really the only state level protection we have for archaeological sites here in Florida is our human remains laws, which prohibit anyone from disturbing a marked or unmarked burial here in the state of Florida. So in theory, without the local ordinance, it could have been a situation where the project just moves forward until construction workers are literally encountering ancestral remains, which would obviously be a terrible situation. So luckily, in this case, there was the archaeological survey before that. But other than that legislation, there is no real blanket protection at the state level here.
Yeah, and I think that's something else that people need to understand when the companies do a project like this, just because they're not, in violation of NAGPRA or the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, doesn't mean they're not disturbing an actual historic or archaeological site.
Right, exactly. So, and I think it's challenging sometimes to make people aware of that. They think, oh, certainly like the site is protected, or there must be, some kind of review process. But that's not always the case. So you're absolutely right that someone could go and, have some kind of negative impact to an archaeological or historical site, and that would not necessarily be illegal, which is, kind of crazy to think about.
Absolutely. And it happens more often than not that people, most of the time they don't even actually know that the legislation exists or what it actually says.
Right, exactly. And I think even for us as archaeologists, it can be challenging too. One, because this project is located on the river in Miami, in addition to the local ordinance, I thought perhaps as an archaeologist, there might be some kind of other state or federal permit that the developer would need for the project to move forward that would then what we call, trigger this federal review, right? So you don't have any kind of state review unless there's a permit that specifically triggers it. So those are typically permits associated with like wetlands and things like that here. But even though the project is literally located on the river, there's no wetland permit, to my knowledge, that's being pulled by the developer. So there was no kind of like, water quality or anything that would then kind of help with that additional layer of state oversight.
So let me ask you this. What role does FPAN actually play in a situation like this?
That's a great question. So our mission here with the Florida Public Archaeology Network is tripartite. So we do public outreach and communication. So for a site like this, in that capacity, we are working with the community to try and help provide some explanation of what's going on at the site and why something like this is going on. We also another part of our mission is assisting the State Division of Historical Resources. So we work closely with their office up in Tallahassee, and that could look like, let's say I go to a public meeting about the site and I'm like, hey, people are really concerned about this aspect, and I'll try and communicate that to the division. And we also assist state and local governments as well. So for this project, we were actually directed to work with the city of Miami on coming up with a presentation for a large town hall, a large historic and environmental preservation board meeting that happens in April. And the goal of that meeting was to assess whether the two parcels the site was on were eligible to begin the designation process, the local designation process for the city. So if anyone's familiar with or has read anything about those meetings, that was the infamous like 5-hour long city meeting. So I sit in a lot of those meetings and just listen, right? You have hundreds of community members who each get like 3 minutes to speak. So the concerns range for a project like this range from representatives like Betty Osceola, who's a leader, like inspirational leader with the Miccosukee. So she's not an official member of the tribal government, but she is active in these types of projects and ensuring that the tribes have a voice in addition to their formal role. I think my favorite comment was a young, to me, she was young. She was probably in her 20s. So many people were talking about preserving the site for future, like what the future should hold, what Miami should look like in the future. So this girl stood up and said, as a literal member of the future, this is what I want to see. So just hearing from the community to me is important, because our role is not to advance any kind of agenda, right? It's like to say, okay, here's like what people want. Here's the situation in the city. And here's maybe like a way forward for providing some kind of avenue for public outreach and education about the site and about this process.
Yeah, and that's what first brought my attention to the site. Is I think that somebody sent me a fragment of that April meeting. I think it's when you said
Yeah.
it was. And it was so inspiring to see, just people from the community coming in and talking about how much they care about what goes on, not even like a block from their house.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, before I came to work for FPAN, I worked in the private sector as an archaeologist. And I had never, ever, I think in my life, been to a public meeting before I started working for FPAN. And then, like I said, part of what we do is if there's some kind of archaeological issue, we would typically go to the public meeting and see what was going on. And there are so many decisions that are happening at local meetings. So that are happening at your, not only your historic preservation board, but like your city commission. So I'd really encourage people to, you don't necessarily have to commit to getting involved forever, but go to at least one meeting and see what kind of issues are being discussed and what the impact they're having on your community, and whether that's a direction you want to see your community moving towards or not.
Yeah, and those meetings are open to the public. They don't, say that like they should or advertise it like they should most of the time. But those meetings are open to the public. And if you have something that you would like to bring to their attention, stand up during the meeting and say it. I mean, it's really important that you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, uh like you said, it can be sometimes challenging to find out the information of where that meeting is happening, but legally you are allowed to go to those meetings and speak your piece. So I like, there's one takeaway or like homework assignment I would want people watching to have. It's, I will go to a public meeting before the end of the year.
Now, keep in mind, the meetings can be very wordy, but they're also very important. So you have to take the good and the bad with those meetings, despite how wordy I said they are.
Yeah, that's true. And I think sometimes for me as an archaeologist, it can be frustrating to go to, especially the historic preservation meetings, because typically what I've seen a lot of here is that there will be extensive discussion in terms of the above ground built environment. Can someone put hurricane proof windows onto a historic house? What kind of impact will that have? And those discussions can last, a really long time. And then there'll be I think I went to one where it was someone who owned a restaurant. The restaurant was in a historic property in a historic district, and they needed to put like a walk-in freezer, obviously because they have a restaurant, so they need to keep food cold. So behind the building, so they had like all the architectural drawings for that. And I think that discussion lasted for like 90 minutes. And typically, other than this 5-hour meeting back in April, archaeological discussions, even when an entire archaeological site might be being destroyed by development, will be, limited to kind of like 15 minutes or less. So sometimes I don't feel like archaeological issues receive the same amount of impassioned consideration that I've seen for the above ground or the built environment.
Yeah, you make a really good point is that, when people talk about archaeology, they only think about what they can see. If it's physical and they can touch it, then it's real. They don't think about the stuff that's still in the ground that people haven't found yet.
Right, exactly. And I think it can be very hard, even sometimes it's hard for us as archaeologists to try and, conceptualize that and what it would have looked like, and then how we interpret that to people. So they're excited when they're standing on an archaeological site and not just bored thinking, oh, this just looks like a field.
Yeah, it's really, strange to be in the middle of, say, if you're here in Alabama, usually it's a very vast cornfield, and you're standing where someone's plantation used to be 100 or 150 years ago, and now it's just a blank cornfield.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's too relatable. One of the projects we worked on with Palm Beach County um, was it was a former tree island. So, before Florida was drained, South Florida was drained by the modern canal system, everything south of Lake Okeechobee would have been these tree islands and been part of the Everglades. So we were working on an archaic period tree island, which was incredible. Um, Except that, the modern to the modern eye, it just looked like a sugarcane field, because that's the modern use. And it was actually identified by LiDAR, so it had this really incredibly subtle elevation change that was imperceptible to the human eye, but was picked up by the LiDAR.
Yeah, I have war style flashbacks of taking cornstalk to the shin first thing in the morning. It's not pleasant.
I worked on this massive pipeline project. We were just surveying, like miles and miles of cornfields in Indiana, and one of my colleagues got cut in the eye by the leaf of the stalk. And then we all had to like wear like eye safety protection for the duration of the project after that like little like workman's incident. He was fine. He just had to like tape both of his eyes shut for like 3 days. Because I guess if you injure one eye, it puts pressure on it if you try and open and close the other one. So
Yeah, and it's
so
kind of
he
hard.
was fine.
I'm just imagining someone trying to do field work without eyes. Like there's
Yeah.
there's no way that that's not a horrible idea. Like, oh, I can't see out in the field, and then they just fall in like a ditch.
Yeah, you definitely want a good friend to help guide you during the field work.
Yeah, you know, be careful how much trust you put in your coworkers. Make sure they like you before lose your sight or something.
Yeah.
So the situation in Miami, where does it stand right now? I know the meeting was back in April, so what has changed between then and now?
Sure. So the excavations on the site, so there is one archaeological site, but two ownership parcels that cover the site. So one of the parcels, that is the parcel that's being currently being excavated. So that has a team of about 100 archaeologists from 5 different firms that are continuing to work on it. And then the neighboring parcel, which we believe is part of the same site, they have not yet started serious construction on that parcel. So in July, we will move into the next phase of the designation, and I believe the city will essentially present a case for designation of the undeveloped parcel. And again, that is local designation. It's not, national register designation. So we're anticipating, and then also in concurrence with that, the developer has reached out to different organizations in the area, including us, to try and prepare like I don't want to say like wish list, but essentially like a wish list of like what we would like to see happen with the site. So for us, it would be, what kind of public outreach um, or education or site experience would we like to see after the site is developed. So I think they're just hoping to have that so they can, try and address some of the concerns that the community has raised in some previous meetings.
Yeah, and that's one thing or another thing that I believe is important when you talk about a story like this, since it is in a highly trafficked area, especially foot traffic where people will stop and look at it, the local opinion is incredibly important.
Yes, exactly. And we have so it's in this area, Brickell. So the Brickell Homeowners Association has expressed some concern over the project. Before these multi-story condos were being built, the site was, a lower, a smaller building, and then this associated parking lot. So in addition to the archaeological concerns, you also have concerns of the community who are like, oh, this is going to take away my river view, and those types of things. But yes, it does mean you have also a lot of really invested people that would hopefully be willing to go out and look at an exhibit. There's the Miami River Walk, which could be extended to this parcel and then potentially have interpretive signage on along the river walk. And then from there, people could walk down to a site like the Miami Circle and really learn a lot about the Tequesta. So I do think there's the opportunity. I know there's also the potential for maybe housing artifacts or replica artifacts somewhere near the site to help improve the experience at the site, or even, for the people who are living in these condos, that's an audience too, right? I would really like for the people who are buying these condos and living there, staying there, to know that the site was there before before they moved in. So for me, that would be an important interpretive audience to try and reach too.
Yeah, so this site is important not just financially, but historically, and not to weigh the scales in one way or another, but since I probably won't ever be able to afford an $8 million condo, I'm going to lean more towards the historic value than I would the financial value.
Sure. And I think for me, obviously as an archaeologist, um the material that is coming out of the investigation and just I mean, how often do you see 100 archaeologists working on any, small site or any kind of like being able to have this opportunity to do such an intensive excavation. So for me, I'm really excited to see not only the results of their report, but I know they're doing things like doing terrestrial laser scanning and things periodically. So I'm really interested in like the future research potential of the site. So it's not just, I think the deal we make as archaeologists, especially archaeologists who are either working in compliance or who are, well, I guess all archaeology is by its nature destructive. So we're all in the same category. Basically, the deal you make as an archaeologist is that you are going to destroy something, but you are going to share what you learned when you were destroying that site. So the most important aspect of the project for me is that the field notes, the photographs, the artifacts, everything is made accessible so we can add to use this opportunity to really add to our understanding about this Tequesta site, which again, we believe to be the capital of the Tequesta, right? And really understand how people were living in South Florida, 6,000 years ago to the present.
So, what is the next? I don't want to say deadline, but I guess that's the most accurate thing. What is the next major milestone or deadline that's coming up in the process?
Yeah, so the next Historic and Environmental Preservation Board meeting is June, next week on June 5th, on Tuesday. That meeting, the city will just give an update of the project to the board. But the real important meeting is the June 11th meeting, when the city will provide the board with recommendations, again, about whether to move forward with this, move to the next stage in this designation process.
So, and I know that the meeting in April was live streamed on, I think I saw it on Instagram. Um, yeah, I'm gonna admit I saw it on Instagram, but there are places people can see these meetings being streamed, aren't there?
Yes, the City of Miami website, they live stream all of their meetings, so people will be able to watch it.
Okay.
They should come in person. Yeah, it's Tuesday, July 11th. I believe it's at 3 p.m. It's at the City of Miami's government headquarters, Pan American Drive, I believe is the address. So
Yeah. So
and you can't bring food or water in. So make sure you're prepared for especially if it's going to be a 5-hour meeting, make sure you like are ready.
yeah, so those of you that are local to the Miami area, please, if you can take the time to go, voice your opinions, let people know what you think. For those of you who are geographically challenged, live stream it. Sit there and watch it with your friends. Have a relaxing beverage.
Yes, and it's okay if you live stream it on Instagram. That is fine too.
Yeah, please don't hold it against me that I live streamed it on Instagram. Well, Sarah, it's been really great having you on the show. Any last minute advice you'd like to hand out?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's been so great talking with everyone today. So for me, I am really privileged to have my dream job working for the Florida Public Archaeology Network. And I would encourage anyone who's watching this to investigate and explore different career options so you know what your dream job might be, and be really open to different experiences. Like I studied classical archaeology, and I always thought I wanted to be an archaeology researcher working in the Mediterranean. And my first field school really dissuaded me of that idea because instead of a glamorous site in like Italy or Greece, I was working on basically on the frontier in like Roman Britain, and it was cold and it was rainy and it was very terrible. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for. So, and throughout my career, when I worked in CRM, I had the opportunity to do a lot of travel and chat with a lot of people. And something that really stuck out to me was that people just are very interested in archaeology that's happening locally, right? So there are a lot of people who would never maybe go to a museum, but are happy to pull up beside you when you're digging holes on the side of the road and learn a little bit more about archaeology and about what you're doing because it's so hyper local. So I think just be open, volunteering, and yeah, just networking. Always feel free to reach out to me as well if you are interested in public archaeology and are looking for more detailed advice.
Yeah, that's a really great point Sarah made is, keep your expectations open-minded. I've just about everyone I've talked to on this show has had their expectations about what archaeology was when they first started, like just blown wide open, like, oh, it's going to be so glamorous. It's going to be so great. And, they're in the middle of a muddy bog in the middle of nowhere and it's cold and rainy. But that actually is what archaeology is. It's very rarely sunshine and rainbows. Unless you actually have sunshine and rainbows, and which I'd like to know where you're doing archaeology so I could come visit.
Well, I hope you get a chance to come visit us in South Florida. I promise. I can almost certainly promise sun unless you're visiting during hurricane season.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me here. I've had a really great time having you on the show, and I hope all of you enjoyed listening to what we were talking about.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.